Chapter 1. The Foundation. Marshall Ashley stood at his kitchen window, watching his 16-year-old son Nate practice basketball shots in their driveway. The morning sun caught the boy's auburn hair, the same color Marina's had been when they first met 15 years ago. Marshall's weathered hands gripped his coffee mug, the ceramic warm against palms that had seen more violence than most men could imagine. At 42, Marshall carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 12 years in special forces. His broad shoulders and lean frame spoke of discipline maintained long after leaving the service. The small scar above his left eyebrow and the way his gray eyes constantly surveyed his surroundings betrayed his military background to those who knew what to look for. "Dad, you coming to my game Friday?" Nate called out, bouncing the ball with practiced ease. "Wouldn't miss it, son." Marshall's voice carried the slight rasp of a man who'd breathed too much desert sand. He meant it. Family came first, it always had. That's why he'd left the military 8 years ago when Nate was 8, choosing to build a successful security consulting business rather than miss his son's childhood. Marina emerged from their bedroom, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 37, she'd maintained the elegant beauty that had first caught Marshall's attention at a military charity gala. Her green dress hugged her curves as she moved with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being watched and admired. "I'll be late tonight," she announced, barely glancing at Marshall as she gathered her purse and laptop bag. Big presentation for the Morrison account. Marina worked as a marketing director for Pinnacle Communications, a mid-sized advertising firm downtown. She'd taken the job 3 years ago, claiming she needed something for herself after years of being just a military wife. Marshall had supported her decision, proud of her ambition and success. "How late?" Marshall asked, studying her face. Something in her demeanor seemed different lately, more distant, more careful with her words. 9, maybe 10. Preston's really pushing for this contract. You know how he is about perfection." Her laugh sounded forced, and she avoided eye contact as she spoke about her boss. Marshall nodded, filing away the name. Preston Quinn had been mentioned frequently in recent months, always in the context of late nights and important projects. Marshall's instincts, honed by years of reading people in life-or-death situations, whispered warnings he'd been trying to ignore. "Dad, can you drive me to school today?" Nate appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder. "Mom's car is blocked in." "Of course." Marshall ruffled his son's hair. Nate had inherited the best of both parents. Marshall's strong jaw and steady temperament, Marina's quick wit and expressive eyes. He was a good kid, honor roll student, starting point guard on the junior varsity team. As they drove to Jefferson High School, Nate chatted about his upcoming game against their crosstown rivals. Marshall listened with genuine interest, offering encouragement and tactical advice. These moments with his son were precious to him, reminders of what he'd fought to protect during his military service and what he worked to provide now. "Thanks, Dad," Nate said as they pulled up to the school. "Love you." "Love you too, son. Remember, confidence and preparation beat talent and luck every time." Nate finished with a grin, reciting Marshall's favorite saying before hopping out of the truck. Marshall watched his son disappear into the crowd of students, then drove to his office across town. Ashley Security Solutions occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Marshall had built the company from nothing, leveraging his military contacts and reputation for getting results. His team of 12 specialists handled everything from corporate security assessments to personal protection for high-profile clients. "Morning, boss," called out Brett Wise, Marshall's second-in-command and former squad mate from Afghanistan. Brett handled the technical side of their operations, surveillance, cybersecurity, information gathering. His boyish face and easy smile masked a razor-sharp intellect and an encyclopedic knowledge of electronic warfare. "Brett, any word on the Patterson contract?" "Signed and sealed. They loved our proposal for the new facility." Brett's expression grew more serious. "Speaking of which, I finished that background check you requested on Preston Quinn." Marshall had asked Brett to run a discreet check on Marina's boss 2 weeks ago, telling himself it was just due diligence. He employed similar caution with anyone who entered his family's orbit, old habits from a profession where paranoia kept you alive. And clean as a whistle on paper. 44 years old, Divorced 3 years ago, no kids. MBA from Northwestern, solid track record at 3 different agencies before Pinnacle. No criminal history, good credit, owns a condo downtown. Brett paused. But there are some interesting gaps in his employment history. 18 months between his last 2 jobs with no clear explanation. Marshall filed the information away. Gaps in a resume often told more interesting stories than what was included. Anything else? Just that he seems to work very late hours. His key card shows him leaving the Pinnacle building after 10 p.m. at least 4 nights a week for the past 6 months. The same time frame Marina had been working late frequently. Marshall kept his expression neutral, but his gut tightened. He'd learned to trust his instincts completely. They'd saved his life more times than he could count. The rest of the morning passed in routine meetings and phone calls. Marshall prided himself on maintaining professionalism even when his personal life felt unsettled. His reputation for calm competence under pressure was the foundation of his business success. At lunch, he drove past Pinnacle Communications, telling himself he was just checking out a potential client in the area. The sleek glass building rose 12 stories above the business district, with underground parking and multiple entrances. Marina's car wasn't in the visitor spaces, likely parked in the employee garage below. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Marina, client lunch running long. Won't be home until after 7. It was 12:30 p.m. He'd been married long enough to know that client lunches rarely lasted 6.5 hours. The knot in his stomach tightened. That evening, Marshall helped Nate with his algebra homework while keeping one eye on the clock. Marina's text updates came sporadically, still in meeting, grabbing dinner with team, finalizing presentation. Each message felt more hollow than the last. She arrived home at 10:47 p.m., looking perfectly put together despite her supposed long day. Her makeup was fresh, her hair styled, and she carried the faint scent of expensive cologne that Marshall didn't recognize. "How was the presentation?" he asked from his chair in the living room, where he'd been reading but mostly thinking. "Good. Really good. Preston thinks we have a strong chance." She kicked off her heels, a gesture that once would have stirred affection in Marshall. Now it just looked rehearsed. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed." She kissed his forehead, a perfunctory gesture devoid of warmth, and headed upstairs. Marshall remained in his chair, listening to the shower run, trying to reconcile the woman he'd married with the stranger now living in his house. 20 minutes later, when he finally went upstairs, Marina was already asleep, her back turned to his side of the bed. Marshall lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and fighting the growing certainty that his marriage was built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath him. In the darkness, his military training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, gather intelligence, prepare for multiple scenarios. He'd hoped he'd never need those skills in his personal life, but Marshall Ashley had survived too much to ignore warning signs now. Tomorrow, he would begin finding out exactly what his wife was hiding. And if his suspicions proved correct, whoever was helping her deceive him would learn why Marshall's former commanding officers had nicknamed him the Collector, because he always collected what was owed to him, in full. Chapter 2. The Other Life. Marina Ashley sat in her silver BMW in the employee parking garage of Pinnacle Communications, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror one more time. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied fresh lipstick, the deep red shade that Preston preferred. She'd been living this double life for 8 months now, and the constant deception was exhausting. But it was also exhilarating. Preston Quinn represented everything Marshall wasn't: sophisticated, cultured, urbane. Where Marshall was all practical efficiency and quiet strength, Preston was passion and spontaneity. He spoke French fluently from his 2 years studying in Paris, appreciated wine and art, and made her feel like the most desirable woman in the world. The elevator doors opened on the 8th floor, revealing the familiar maze of cubicles and corner offices that comprised Pinnacle's creative department. Marina had worked here for 3 years, starting as a senior account coordinator and working her way up to marketing director. It was the first job she'd ever truly loved, the first place where she felt valued for her mind rather than just her role as a military wife and mother. "Morning, beautiful," came a familiar voice behind her. Marina turned to find Preston Quinn approaching with 2 cups of coffee. At 44, he cut an impressive figure, tall and lean with silver-touched dark hair and the kind of refined features that belonged in a cologne advertisement. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes Italian leather, his smile absolutely devastating. "Preston," she said quietly, accepting the coffee with a carefully neutral expression. They were always careful at the office, maintaining professional distance during business hours. The handful of employees who arrived early were already at their desks, immersed in their work. "Conference room B in 5 minutes," he murmured, his fingers brushing hers as he handed over the cup. "We need to review the Morrison presentation." Conference room B was their code. It was the small meeting space at the end of the hall, rarely used and equipped with frosted glass that provided privacy while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business. Marina waited the appropriate interval, then made her way down the hall with a legal pad and pen. Anyone watching would see a director heading to a routine meeting with her supervisor. Preston was already there when she entered, having shed his suit jacket. The moment the door clicked shut, the professional facades disappeared. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the intensity that had ignited their affair 8 months ago. "I've been thinking about you all night," he whispered against her ear, his hands tangling in her hair. "Preston, we can't, not here." But even as she protested, Marina melted into his embrace. The guilt that constantly gnawed at her dissolved in moments like these, replaced by a rush of desire and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted. "Leave him," Preston said suddenly, pulling back to look into her eyes. "Marina, you're wasting your life with that man. You're brilliant, you're beautiful, you deserve so much more than suburban mediocrity." It wasn't the first time he'd made this argument, and each time it became harder to resist. Preston painted pictures of the life they could have together: travel, culture, passion. He spoke of her potential, her intelligence, all the things Marshall had never seemed to notice. "It's not that simple," she said, though the words lacked conviction. "There's Nate to think about. He's 16, Marina. In 2 years he'll be in college anyway. Don't sacrifice your happiness for someone who'll barely remember your sacrifice." The harsh assessment of her son stung, but Preston had a way of making everything sound logical and inevitable. He'd grown up wealthy, had never wanted for anything, never understood the value of stability and security that Marshall provided. "We should get back," Marina said, straightening her hair and checking her lipstick. "People will notice." "Tonight," Preston said firmly. "My place." "Tell him you're working late again." Marina nodded, already constructing the lie in her mind. The deception had become second nature, each fabrication easier than the last. She told herself she deserved this happiness, that she'd sacrificed enough years being the perfect military wife and mother. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Marina threw herself into her work with the dedication that had earned her rapid promotions. She genuinely loved the creative challenge of marketing, the strategic thinking required to position brands and craft compelling narratives. But underneath her professional competence ran a constant current of anxiety. Living a double life required meticulous attention to detail, remembering which lies she'd told, ensuring her stories remained consistent, monitoring her behavior for telltale signs of deception. She'd become an expert at reading Marshall's moods, watching for signs of suspicion. Lately, he'd seemed more observant, asking more questions about her schedule. Marina told herself it was paranoia, but Marshall's years in special forces had given him an almost supernatural ability to detect deception. At 4:30 p.m., she texted Marshall about working late, using their usual script about client demands and presentation deadlines. His response was brief. "Okay. Drive safely." Preston's downtown condo occupied the top 2 floors of a converted historic building, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic city views. It was a world away from her suburban home with its family photos and Nate's basketball trophies. "Wine?" Preston asked, already pulling a bottle of Bordeaux from his temperature-controlled collection. "Please." Marina accepted the glass gratefully, settling onto his Italian leather sofa. Here, surrounded by Preston's carefully curated art collection and designer furniture, she could pretend to be someone else entirely, not Marshall Ashley's wife or Nate's mother, but simply Marina, a sophisticated woman deserving of passion and luxury. "I've been thinking," Preston said, settling beside her with his own glass. "About us. About the future. Preston, hear me out." He set down his wine and took her hands in his. "I'm 44 years old, Marina. I've been married and divorced. I've focused on my career. I've lived for myself. But with you, I've realized what I've been missing. I want to build a life together. The intensity in his dark eyes made her pulse race. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to marry you. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I'm saying I want you to leave Marshall and build something real with me. Marina's breath caught. The ring was exquisite, a 3-carat emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones, set in platinum. It was worth more than her car, more than most people made in a year. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Try it on. With trembling fingers, Marina slipped the ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly, catching the light from Preston's expensive fixtures and throwing rainbow reflections across the walls. I can't wear it, she said, even as she admired the way it looked on her finger. Not yet. Then when? Preston's voice held an edge of frustration. How long are we supposed to keep sneaking around like teenagers? You're a grown woman, Marina. You have a right to be happy. I need time to figure out how to tell Nate. How to tell Marshall. The practical considerations crashed over her like cold water. Divorce meant lawyers, custody arrangements, financial settlements. It meant tearing apart the life she'd built, hurting her son, and facing Marshall's reaction. For all his quiet demeanor, Marina knew her husband well enough to understand that he was not a man who would accept betrayal gracefully. His military background had taught him to view loyalty as sacred, and his love for their family ran deeper than most people could fathom. Promise me you'll think about it, Preston said, taking the ring back reluctantly. Promise me you won't let fear keep you from the life you deserve. Marina nodded, though part of her wondered if she was being asked to choose between security and passion or between two different versions of herself. With Marshall, she was stable, responsible, safe. With Preston, she was desired, sophisticated, alive. As she drove home later that evening, the weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical force. The suburbs looked different through her windshield, smaller, more confining, more ordinary. Every house looked the same, every lawn perfectly manicured, every life following the same predictable pattern. Marshall was reading in his chair when she arrived, the living room lamp casting warm light across his weathered features. He looked up as she entered, his gray eyes studying her face with the intensity that had once made her feel protected but now felt invasive. How was your day? He asked, closing his book and giving her his full attention. Good. Productive. The lie came easily now, though she felt a familiar stab of guilt at the concern in his voice. The Morrison presentation? Going well. Preston thinks we have a real shot at landing them. She kicked off her heels, the same gesture she'd performed thousands of times, though now it felt like playing a role in a production she no longer wanted to be part of. That's good. Marshall stood, moving toward her with the quiet grace that marked all his movements. You seem tired. For a moment, Marina wondered if he somehow knew. If his trained eye could see through her carefully constructed facade to the truth underneath. But then he kissed her forehead, the same gentle gesture he'd performed for 15 years, and she realized he was simply being Marshall, protective, caring, completely devoted to his family, which made her betrayal all the more devastating and all the more necessary. Because somewhere along the way, his devotion had begun to feel like a cage, and Preston's passion felt like the key to freedom. As she headed upstairs to shower, Marina caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was beautiful, successful, living a life that most people would envy. But behind her green eyes lay the weight of a choice that would soon destroy everything Marshall had worked to build, everything they'd shared together. And for the first time, Marina wondered if the price of her happiness might be too high for everyone else to pay. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The phone call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, while Marshall was reviewing security protocols for a new client. Brett Wise looked up from his computer screen as Marshall's phone buzzed insistently on his desk. Ashley Security Solutions. Mr. Ashley? This is Patricia Collins from Jefferson High School. I'm the school nurse. Marshall's full attention snapped to the call immediately. School nurses didn't call parents for minor issues. What's wrong? Your son Nate has been injured. You need to come to the hospital immediately. We're at General Memorial. What happened? Marshall was already grabbing his keys, motioning for Brett to follow. He has a broken jaw, Mr. Ashley. He's conscious and stable, but you need to get here as soon as possible. The 15-minute drive to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and racing thoughts. Marshall's mind cycled through possibilities: sports injury, accident, fight at school. None of them prepared him for what he found in the emergency room. Nate sat on an examination bed, his face swollen and bruised, his jaw visibly misaligned. Tears streamed down his cheeks, though he was trying to control them. Marshall's son had inherited his father's reluctance to show vulnerability. "Dad." Nate's voice came out distorted, muffled by the injury and the temporary brace holding his jaw in place. "I'm here, son." Marshall moved to his side immediately, his hands hovering uncertainly over Nate's shoulders, afraid to cause more pain. "What happened?" The story came out in halting, painful fragments. Nate had decided to surprise his mother at work for her birthday. He'd saved money from his part-time job to buy her flowers and had convinced a friend to drive him downtown during lunch period. "I went to her office," Nate managed, each word clearly causing discomfort. But she wasn't there. The receptionist said she was in a meeting with Mr. Quinn. Marshall's blood began to run cold. "So I went to find her. To surprise her." Nate's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Dad, I found her, but she wasn't in a meeting." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marshall already knew what his son had witnessed, but he needed to hear it all. They were kissing. More than kissing. Nate's voice broke. Mom was on his desk, and they were. I just stood there. I couldn't move. Marshall's hands slowly clenched into fists at his sides. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of trust and devotion, and Marina had been. "Mr. Quinn saw me first," Nate continued, his young voice shaking with trauma and confusion. "He got angry, really angry. He pushed Mom away and came at me. He said things about Mom that I can't repeat." "What things?" Marshall's voice came out deadly quiet. "Just awful things. About how long they'd been together. About what she told him about you, about us." Nate winced as he tried to speak more clearly. He was furious that I'd seen them. He grabbed me and shoved me against the wall, said if I told anyone what I'd seen, he'd make sure something worse happened to you. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Marshall's mind with crystal clarity. The late nights, the careful behavior, the distance in his marriage, it had all been a lie. Marina had been living a double life, and now their son had paid the price for discovering the truth. "That's when he hit me," Nate said, his hand moving gingerly to his swollen jaw. "Not a slap. A real punch. He knew how to hurt me." Marshall's vision tinged red around the edges. His special forces training had taught him to compartmentalize emotions during crisis situations, but the image of a grown man striking his 16-year-old son threatened to overwhelm his control. "Where was your mother during this?" She was screaming at him to stop. "But she didn't come to help me, Dad. She just stood there crying, telling him he'd ruined everything." Nate's voice dropped to a whisper. "She was more upset about being caught than about me getting hurt." Dr. Sarah Chun, the emergency room physician, appeared at Marshall's elbow. "Mr. Ashley, can I speak with you privately?" They stepped into the hallway, leaving Nate with a nurse who was administering pain medication. "Your son has a fractured mandible, a broken jaw," Dr. Chin explained. "It's a clean break, but it will require surgery to properly align and stabilize. We're looking at 6 to 8 weeks of recovery time." "Surgery. The break is displaced, which means the bone fragments aren't lined up correctly. We need to insert titanium plates and screws to hold everything in place while it heals. Without surgery, he could have permanent problems with his bite, speech, even basic jaw function." Marshall nodded, processing the information with the same methodical approach he used for mission briefings. "When? Tomorrow morning. We'll need to keep him overnight for observation. Head injuries can be tricky, and we want to make sure there's no underlying brain trauma." As Dr. Chin walked away, Marshall stood in the sterile hospital corridor and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The man who had once sworn to love and protect Marina Ashley was gone, replaced by someone much colder and infinitely more dangerous. His phone buzzed with a text message from Marina. "Working late again tonight. Love you." The casual lie, sent while their son lay in a hospital bed with a broken jaw caused by her lover, was the final straw. Marshall typed back, "Take your time." Then he called Brett Wise. "I need you to do something for me," Marshall said when Brett answered. "Everything we discussed about Preston Quinn. I need a complete workup. Financial records, personal habits, property holdings, social connections, everything." Marshall, what's? Someone put their hands on my son. Someone broke his jaw. And that someone is going to pay a debt that's been 15 years in the making. Brett's voice immediately sharpened. In Afghanistan, he'd seen Marshall in combat mode before. What do you need? I need to know everything about Preston Quinn and Marina Ashley that they think nobody else knows. Phone records, credit card statements, travel history, meeting locations, all of it. Marshall. Brett. Marshall's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. My son is lying in a hospital bed because my wife's lover decided to teach a 16-year-old boy a lesson about keeping secrets. I want to know everything about both of them, and I want to know it by tomorrow night. You've got it. Marshall returned to Nate's bedside, where his son was fighting the effects of the pain medication but losing the battle against exhaustion. Dad. Nate's voice was barely audible. I'm here. Are you going to leave, Mom? The question cut through Marshall like a blade. His son, injured, traumatized, facing surgery tomorrow, was worried about his parents' marriage falling apart. Don't worry about that right now, Marshall said gently. Just focus on getting better. But what Mr. Quinn said, about what Mom told him about you, about our family. Fresh tears leaked from Nate's swollen eyes. Was any of it real? Was she ever happy with us? Marshall looked at his son, his flesh and blood, the center of his universe, and made a decision that would define everything that came next. Son, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What happened today wasn't your fault. What you saw, what was done to you, none of it was your fault. Marshall's voice was steady, but beneath the surface, a cold fury was building to a roar. And I promise you this, no one will ever hurt you again. No one will ever threaten our family again. Do you understand me? Nate nodded weakly. Good. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we'll get your jaw fixed, and then... Marshall's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Then we're going to collect some debts that are long overdue. As Nate drifted off to sleep, Marshall sat in the plastic hospital chair and began to plan. His military training hadn't just taught him how to fight, it had taught him how to wage war. And what Marina and Preston Quinn had done to his family was nothing less than a declaration of war. They had betrayed his trust, endangered his son, and torn apart everything he'd worked to build. They thought they could hide behind lies and carefully constructed facades, thought they could hurt his family and walk away unscathed. They were about to learn that Marshall Ashley had spent 12 years learning how to dismantle enemies who were better armed, better funded, and better connected than either of them could ever hope to be. And unlike his previous missions, this one was personal. The hunter had found his prey. Now came the part that Marshall Ashley had always excelled at. The hunt. Chapter 4, Intelligence Gathering. Marshall Ashley sat in his office at 5:47 a.m., surrounded by a growing collection of files, photographs, and digital printouts that painted a picture of betrayal more comprehensive than he'd imagined. Brett Wise had worked through the night, utilizing contacts in law enforcement, banking, and telecommunications to build a complete profile of Marina and Preston's relationship. Tell me what you found, Marshall said, his voice carrying the same controlled intensity he'd used in pre-mission briefings. Brett spread the documents across Marshall's desk with the precision of someone laying out evidence for a court case. It's worse than we thought. They've been together for 8 months, just like you suspected. But it's not just an affair, Marshall. They've been planning to leave together. The first document was a bank statement showing a joint savings account opened 6 months ago in both Marina's and Preston's names. The balance showed $47,000 in deposits, all from Marina's personal checking account. She's been skimming money from your household account, Brett continued. Small amounts at first, 200 here, 300 there. Nothing that would trigger attention. But it adds up. Marshall studied the statement with detached professionalism, filing away each transaction date and amount. His wife hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been systematically stealing from their family to fund her escape plan. Travel records show they took a long weekend in New York 6 weeks ago, Brett said, sliding over hotel receipts and airline confirmations. Stayed at the Plaza, took in some Broadway shows. Expensive restaurants, high-end shopping. Marina told you she was at a marketing conference in Chicago that weekend. Marshall remembered that weekend clearly. He'd taken care of Nate solo, handling basketball practice pickup and grocery shopping, proud of his wife for advancing her career. The betrayal cut deeper than simple infidelity. It was a systematic deception that had turned him into an unknowing accomplice in his own destruction. Phone records confirmed daily contact, Brett continued. Texts, calls, even some video calls late at night when you were presumably asleep. Marina's phone shows GPS data placing her at Preston's condo at least 3 nights a week for the past 4 months. The technological evidence painted a picture of a woman living a complete double life. Marshall had been a career soldier, trained to read people and situations, yet his own wife had deceived him for months without raising serious suspicion. Any idea what triggered Nate's discovery yesterday? Actually, yes. Brett pulled out a tablet showing Preston's work calendar. Yesterday was supposed to be his quarterly review with the senior partners at Pinnacle. Marina knew he'd be in meetings all afternoon, so she probably thought they were safe. Nate's surprise visit was just bad timing. Marshall studied the timeline, understanding now why Preston had reacted so violently. The man had been caught in a compromising position that could destroy his career and reputation, and he'd lashed out at the one person who couldn't fight back, a 16-year-old boy. What about Preston's background? You mentioned gaps in his employment history. That's where it gets interesting. Brett's expression darkened. Preston Quinn isn't quite the sophisticated executive he pretends to be. His real name is Preston Quick, and he grew up in a working-class family in Detroit. Changed his name when he moved to Chicago 12 years ago. Brett laid out a series of documents, court records, police reports, employment files that told a very different story than Preston's carefully crafted professional persona. 2 domestic violence arrests in Michigan. Both charges dropped when the victims declined to press charges. A pattern of manipulating women, getting them to support him financially, then moving on when the money dried up. His ex-wife's divorce filing includes accusations of emotional and physical abuse. Marshall absorbed this information with growing understanding. Preston wasn't just a man having an affair. He was a predator who specialized in targeting successful, vulnerable women. Marina, despite her intelligence and professional success, had become his latest mark. The employment gaps correspond to times when he was living off women he was manipulating, Brett continued. He's done this before, Marshall. Multiple times. Marina isn't special to him. She's just the next source of income and status. The revelation shifted something in Marshall's perception of the situation. His wife wasn't just unfaithful. She was being victimized by someone who'd made a career of financial and emotional manipulation. It didn't excuse her betrayal, but it provided crucial intelligence about Preston's methods and motivations. Current financial situation? Preston's leverage to the hilt. The condo, the car, the expensive lifestyle, it's all financed. He makes good money at Pinnacle, but he spends more than he earns. Marina's been supplementing his income without realizing it, paying for dinners and trips she thinks are romantic gestures. Marshall studied photographs Brett had taken of Preston's building, his daily routines, his social connections. The man followed predictable patterns. Gym every morning at 6 a.m., lunch at the same upscale restaurant 3 times a week, drinks at an exclusive downtown bar most Friday nights. Security at his building? Minimal. Keycard access to the parking garage and lobby, but no guards, no cameras in the stairwells. The penthouse has a private elevator, but it's not secure, just requires a key card that's easily duplicated. Marshall nodded, his mind already working through various scenarios. Preston's apparent sophistication was largely surface level. Underneath, he was just another predator who'd gotten comfortable operating without consequences. What about Marina's plans? Brett hesitated before answering. Marshall, you need to see this. He produced a printed email exchange between Marina and Preston, recovered from deleted files on Marina's work computer. From m.ashley@pinnaclecom.com to p.quinn@pinnaclecom.com. Subject, our future. Preston, I've been thinking about what you said last night. You're right. I can't keep living this double life forever. Marshall deserves honesty, and Nate deserves better than a mother who's lying every day. I want to tell them both this weekend. I know it will be difficult, but we can't build something real on a foundation of deception. I love you. I want our life together to start properly. Forever yours, Marina. From p.quinn@pinnaclecom.com to m.ashley@pinnaclecom.com. Subject, our future. Marina, I'm glad you're ready to take this step. We both know Marshall will make this as difficult as possible, Military men don't handle defeat well. Be prepared for him to fight the divorce settlement aggressively. That's why I think we should accelerate our timeline. The longer we wait, the more time he has to prepare financially and legally. Have you given more thought to the Portland opportunity? With my connections there, we could both start fresh. New city, new opportunities, new life together. Your marketing skills would be perfect for the tech industry there. I love you too. Soon we won't have to hide anymore. P. Marshall read the exchange twice, processing the full scope of their planning. Marina wasn't just having an affair. She was preparing to leave him and take Nate across the country to start a new life with Preston. The timeline suggested they'd been planning to tell him this weekend, just 3 days after Preston had violently assaulted their son. There's more, Brett said quietly. He produced a legal document, a consultation agreement with a Portland divorce attorney, signed by Marina Ashley. She contacted a lawyer 2 weeks ago. Initial consultation about complex asset division and interstate custody arrangements. The attorney's notes suggest she was seeking advice about minimizing Marshall's parental rights and maximizing her share of joint assets. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Marina wasn't just leaving him. She was planning to take everything she could, including his son, and disappear to the other side of the country with a man who specialized in manipulating and discarding women. Marshall stood and walked to his office window, looking out over the city where his wife and her lover believed they were orchestrating his downfall without his knowledge. For 8 months, they'd been planning, scheming, preparing to destroy everything he'd built and leave him with nothing. But they'd made a critical error in their calculations. They'd assumed Marshall Ashley was just another civilian husband who would react with emotional devastation and legal challenges. They had no understanding of what 12 years in special forces had taught him about strategic planning, operational security, and the systematic destruction of enemy assets. Brett, Marshall said without turning around, how long would it take you to arrange complete electronic surveillance on both of them? 24 hours. Phone taps, email monitoring, GPS tracking, audio surveillance of both their homes and offices. Do it. I want to know every conversation, every plan, every move they make. Marshall turned back to face his oldest friend and most trusted ally. And then I want you to help me design something special for them. What kind of special? Marshall's smile was colder than a winter morning in Afghanistan. The kind that will teach them the difference between a civilian husband and a special forces operator who spent 12 years learning how to dismantle enemies. Marshall, I know you're angry. Angry doesn't begin to cover what I am, Brett. They broke my son's jaw. They've been stealing from my family. They're planning to take my child across the country and leave me with nothing. Marshall's voice remained perfectly controlled, which somehow made it more intimidating than shouting would have been. But I'm not going to react emotionally. I'm going to plan methodically, execute precisely, and ensure they understand exactly what they've cost themselves. Brett studied his friend's face, recognizing the transformation he'd witnessed in combat zones. Marshall Ashley, the devoted husband and father, was temporarily set aside, replaced by the strategic mind that had successfully completed dozens of high-stakes missions against impossible odds. What do you need me to do? Everything we just discussed. Complete surveillance, detailed planning, and perfect timing. Marshall returned to his desk, already beginning to sketch out operational parameters. Preston Quinn and Marina Ashley think they're playing chess with someone who doesn't know the rules. They're about to learn that I've been playing this game a lot longer than they have. And when it's over? Marshall looked up from his notes, his gray eyes reflecting the kind of cold determination that had made him legendary among his former unit. When it's over, they'll understand why my former commanding officer always said that Marshall Ashley collects every debt in full, with interest. Chapter 5, Setting the Trap. Marina Ashley stood in the bathroom of her suburban home at 6:15 a.m., staring at her reflection in the mirror and trying to convince herself that everything was going according to plan. The phone call from the hospital last night had shattered her illusion of control, forcing her to confront the reality that her carefully constructed double life was beginning to collapse. Nate's surgery had been successful. His jaw was now held together with titanium plates and surgical wire, but the look in Marshall's eyes when she'd finally arrived at the hospital had chilled her to the bone. He'd been polite, even considerate, asking about her day and accepting her explanations about emergency client meetings. But something fundamental had changed in his demeanor. Her husband was suspicious. "Morning," Marshall said as she entered the kitchen, his voice carrying the same warm tone it had for 15 years. He was making coffee, already dressed in his business casual attire, looking every inch the successful security consultant rather than the special forces operator he'd once been. "How's Nate?" Marina asked, accepting the cup he offered her. The domestic routine felt surreal given what she knew about Preston's violent outburst yesterday. "Uncomfortable, but he'll heal. Dr. Chun says he should be able to eat soft foods by next week." Marshall's gray eyes studied her face with what seemed like genuine concern. "You look tired. Long night at the office." The question felt loaded, though Marina couldn't pinpoint why. The Morrison presentation. Preston's really pushing for perfection on this one. Marshall nodded sympathetically. "Important client?" "Could be. Preston thinks it could lead to a major expansion of our services." The lie came easily, though Marina noticed Marshall's expression didn't change when she mentioned Preston's name. No flicker of recognition, no tightening around his eyes. "That's great, honey. You've worked so hard to build your career." The conversation felt normal, almost nostalgic in its comfortable familiarity. For a moment, Marina wondered if she was making a mistake, if she was throwing away something precious for the excitement of something uncertain. Then her phone buzzed with a text from Preston. "Can't stop thinking about you. Lunch today." The familiar thrill ran through her, reminding her why she'd started this relationship in the first place. Preston made her feel alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "I should get going," Marina said, gathering her purse and laptop bag. "Another long day." "Drive safely," Marshall said, kissing her forehead with the same gentle affection he'd shown for years. "Love you." "Love you too," Marina replied automatically, the words feeling increasingly hollow. What she didn't know was that Brett Wise was sitting in a surveillance van 2 blocks away, monitoring the conversation through the wireless microphones Marshall had installed throughout their house the previous evening. Every word, every tone, every casual lie was being recorded and analyzed. At Pinnacle Communications, Marina threw herself into legitimate work with the focus of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. The Morrison account was real, and she genuinely believed Preston's strategic approach could win them the contract. It was one of the few truthful things in her life lately. At 11:47 a.m., Preston appeared at her office door with his characteristic smile and expensive suit. "Conference room B?" he suggested, using their established code. Marina nodded, gathering her legal pad and following him down the hallway. To any observer, they looked like 2 professionals heading to a routine business meeting. What they didn't know was that Brett had gained access to Pinnacle's building the previous night, installing audio and video surveillance equipment in Conference Room B and 6 other locations throughout the building. Every intimate moment, every whispered conversation, every strategic discussion about their future was now being captured in high-definition detail. "How's Nate?" Preston asked the moment the door closed, though his tone suggested more concern about potential complications than genuine care for the boy's welfare. "He'll recover. Marshall doesn't suspect anything. He thinks it was a random accident at school." Preston's relief was visible. "Good. We can't afford complications right now, not when we're so close to making this transition." "About that," Marina said, settling into a chair across from him. "I've been thinking about the timeline. Maybe we should slow down a little, make sure Nate is fully recovered before we make any major changes." Preston's expression darkened. "Marina, we've discussed this. The longer we wait, the more opportunities Marshall has to discover what's happening. You said yourself he's been asking more questions lately. But if we tell him this weekend, we control the narrative. We explain that we've fallen in love, that we want to build a life together, that this isn't anyone's fault. It's just how life sometimes unfolds." Preston moved closer, taking her hands in his. "But if he discovers the truth on his own, if he has time to investigate and plan, he could make things very difficult for both of us." Marina felt the familiar pull of Preston's logic and charisma. He had a way of making complex emotional situations sound like simple business decisions, reducing the messiness of human relationships to strategic considerations. "The Portland opportunity won't wait forever," Preston continued. "My contact there is excited about bringing both of us aboard, but they need a commitment soon. Fresh start, new city, new life together. Isn't that what we've been planning?" It is, Marina said, though uncertainty clouded her voice. It's just, seeing Nate hurt yesterday, seeing how worried Marshall was. It makes this all feel more real, more complicated. Preston's patience was clearly wearing thin. Marina, you can't have it both ways. You can't build a future with me while clinging to your past with Marshall. At some point, you have to choose. I have chosen, Marina said, though her voice lacked conviction. I just want to do this right. I want to minimize the damage to everyone involved. There's no way to do this without damage, Preston said bluntly. That's the price of authentic living. Sometimes you have to hurt people in the short term to create genuine happiness in the long term. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Preston systematically dismantling Marina's doubts and reinforcing her commitment to their plans. He was masterful at emotional manipulation, knowing exactly which buttons to push to make her feel guilty for hesitating and excited about their future together. What neither of them realized was that every word was being transmitted in real time to Marshall Ashley, who was sitting in his office across town, listening with the detached professionalism of someone conducting intelligence analysis on enemy targets. Brett, Marshall said into his headset, are you getting all this? Every word. Video quality is excellent too. We'll have clear documentation of their entire relationship if needed for legal proceedings. Good. What's Preston's schedule for the rest of the day? Lunch meeting with actual clients at 1 p.m., conference call with Portland at 3 p.m., drinks with Marina at 6 p.m. at that upscale place on 5th Street. Marshall made notes on his legal pad, cross-referencing Preston's schedule with his own operational timeline. And Marina? Back-to-back meetings until 4 p.m., then she's blocked out time for administrative work until 7 p.m. That's when she usually heads to Preston's place. Perfect. Marshall leaned back in his chair, studying the surveillance photos Brett had taken of Preston's building, his daily routines, his security vulnerabilities. I think it's time we introduced ourselves to Mr. Quinn. What did you have in mind? Marshall's smile was entirely predatory. Something educational. Preston seems to enjoy teaching lessons to people who can't fight back. I think it's time he learned what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that particular lesson. Marshall, if you're thinking about physical confrontation, I'm not thinking about anything illegal or traceable, Marshall said calmly. But Preston Quinn assaulted my son and is planning to steal my family. He's made this personal, and now he's going to learn the difference between bullying a 16-year-old boy and dealing with someone who actually knows how to fight back. What's the plan? Marshall stood and walked to his wall map of the city, studying the locations of Preston's apartment, his gym, his favorite restaurants, his office building. Every detail had been cataloged, every pattern analyzed, every vulnerability identified. Tonight, Preston is going to receive a message, Marshall said quietly. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, but something that will make him understand that his actions have consequences. And then we're going to watch how he reacts when he realizes he's no longer the hunter. He's the prey. And Marina? Marshall's expression hardened. Marina's going to learn that betraying Marshall Ashley isn't as simple as filing divorce papers and moving to Portland. She's going to discover that 15 years of marriage means I know everything about her fears, her weaknesses, her deepest vulnerabilities. This is starting to sound like psychological warfare. That's exactly what it is, Marshall confirmed. Preston and Marina think they're sophisticated enough to manipulate me and destroy my family. They're about to learn that psychological warfare is something I studied at a graduate level in some very unforgiving classrooms. Brett studied his friend's face, recognizing the cold calculation that had made Marshall Ashley legendary among their former unit. And when it's over? When it's over, they'll understand that actions have consequences, that betraying someone's trust carries a price, and that Marshall Ashley always collects his debts in full. Marshall returned to his desk and began sketching out operational details with the same methodical precision he'd once used to plan military missions. Preston Quinn and Marina Ashley had started a war they didn't understand against an opponent they'd seriously underestimated. Now the real education was about to begin. Chapter 6. The First Strike. Preston Quinn emerged from his downtown gym at 7:23 p.m., endorphins from his workout mixing with anticipation for his evening with Marina. He'd managed to convince her to overcome her hesitations about their timeline, and she'd agreed to have the conversation with Marshall this weekend. By Monday, they'd be packing for Portland, leaving behind the complications of suburban family life for the sophisticated urban existence Preston had always craved. The parking garage beneath his building was nearly empty, most residents having returned from work hours earlier. Preston's BMW was parked in its assigned spot near the elevator, reflecting the overhead fluorescent lights in its polished surface. He was fumbling for his keys when he noticed the envelope tucked under his windshield wiper. Preston looked around the empty garage, confirming he was alone, before retrieving the envelope. His name was written on the front in block letters. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single photograph and a brief note. The photograph showed Preston and Marina in conference room B at Pinnacle Communications, clearly engaged in intimate conversation. The image quality was professional, obviously taken with high-end surveillance equipment. The timestamp showed it had been taken just 6 hours earlier. The note was brief and to the point. Preston, actions have consequences. Secrets have expiration dates. 16-year-old boys deserve better than having their jaws broken by cowards. This is your only warning. A concerned observer. Preston's hands trembled as he read the note a second time. Someone knew about his relationship with Marina. Someone had been watching them, documenting their affair with professional-grade surveillance equipment. Someone knew he was responsible for Nate's injury. But who? And what did they want? Preston's mind raced through possibilities. Corporate espionage was always a concern in the advertising industry, but this felt more personal. The reference to Nate's broken jaw suggested someone with inside knowledge of yesterday's incident. A horrible thought occurred to him. What if Marshall Ashley already knew everything? No, that was impossible. Marshall's behavior at the hospital had been completely normal. Concerned father, supportive husband, no indication of suspicion or anger. If he'd known about the affair, there would have been signs. Military men weren't known for their emotional subtlety. Preston drove to his penthouse apartment with uncharacteristic caution, checking his rearview mirror constantly and taking an indirect route through downtown traffic. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, though he saw nothing suspicious. His apartment, usually a sanctuary of carefully curated luxury, now felt exposed and vulnerable. Preston closed all the blinds and double-checked the door locks before pouring himself a large glass of wine and trying to think through his situation logically. Someone knew about his relationship with Marina. That was clear, but their motives remained unclear. The note mentioned Nate's injury, but made no specific demands or threats. It was psychological pressure rather than direct confrontation, almost like military strategy. Preston's blood ran cold as pieces of information clicked together in his mind. Marshall Ashley was former Special Forces. He'd spent 12 years in military intelligence and special operations before starting his security consulting business. If anyone would have the skills and resources to conduct sophisticated surveillance operations, it would be Marshall. But that meant Marshall knew everything. About the affair, about Preston's plans to take Marina to Portland, about his violent confrontation with Nate. And if Marshall knew everything, why was he playing this cat-and-mouse game instead of confronting them directly? Preston's phone buzzed with a text from Marina, running late. Be there in 20 minutes. He stared at the message, suddenly uncertain about everything. Was Marina still ignorant of Marshall's knowledge, or was she part of some elaborate deception? Had she been feeding information back to her husband all along? The paranoia was overwhelming, but Preston forced himself to think clearly. If Marshall knew about the affair, he would have acted by now. Military men were direct, confrontational. They didn't engage in subtle psychological warfare against civilians. More likely, the photograph had been taken by a private investigator hired by someone else. Maybe Marina's friend from work had noticed their relationship and decided to cause trouble. Or perhaps one of Preston's former girlfriends was seeking revenge for their failed relationship. By the time Marina arrived at his apartment, Preston had convinced himself that the situation was manageable. Whoever had taken the photograph was trying to intimidate him, but they hadn't made any specific demands or threats. It was probably just someone fishing for information or trying to create drama. You look tense, Marina observed as she entered his apartment, immediately noticing his agitated state. Just a long day, Preston said, deciding not to mention the photograph. There was no point in making Marina paranoid when they were so close to executing their plans. How was your evening with Marshall? Normal. He helped Nate with his homework, asked about my day, same routine as always. Marina accepted the glass of wine Preston offered her. I still can't believe he doesn't suspect anything. Sometimes I think he's completely oblivious to what's happening around him. Preston nodded, though the photograph in his briefcase suggested otherwise. Did you give any more thought to our conversation this afternoon? I did. And you're right. We can't keep postponing this forever. Marina's voice carried new resolve. I'm going to tell him this weekend. About us, about Portland, about everything. Are you sure you're ready for that? As ready as I'll ever be. Marina moved closer to him on the sofa, her green eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and fear. Marshall deserves honesty, even if it hurts him. And we deserve a chance to build something real together. Preston felt a surge of triumph mixed with relief. Despite his paranoia about the photograph, their plans were still on track. By Monday, they'd be free of Marshall Ashley and the complications of suburban family life. What Preston didn't know was that Marshall was sitting in his own living room across town, listening to their entire conversation through the surveillance equipment Brett had installed in Preston's apartment. Every word of their betrayal, every detail of their plans, every casual dismissal of his family's welfare was being recorded for posterity. Brett, Marshall said into his wireless headset, Phase 1 is complete. How's Preston reacting to our little gift? Exactly as predicted. Paranoid, suspicious, but not quite ready to abandon his plans. He's trying to convince himself it's not a serious threat. Good. That means Phase 2 will be even more effective. Marshall made notes on his legal pad, tracking Preston's psychological state like a scientist monitoring an experiment. What about Marina? Still completely oblivious. She has no idea you know anything about their affair or their plans. Marshall nodded, studying the tactical map he'd spread across his coffee table. Red pins marked Preston's apartment, Marina's office, their usual meeting locations. Blue pins showed the positions of Brett's surveillance teams. Green pins indicated the locations where Phase 2 would unfold tomorrow. Remember, Marshall said quietly, this isn't about revenge. This is about justice. They broke my son's jaw, betrayed my trust, and planned to steal my family. Now they're going to learn what it costs to make an enemy of someone who spent 12 years learning how to dismantle people who thought they were untouchable. What's the next move? Marshall's smile was colder than winter morning. Tomorrow, Preston Quinn is going to discover that psychological pressure was just the opening move. Tomorrow, he's going to learn the difference between intimidating a 16-year-old boy and dealing with someone who actually knows how to fight back. And Marina? Marina's going to learn that betraying 15 years of marriage isn't as simple as moving to Portland and starting fresh. She's going to discover that some debts follow you wherever you go. As Preston and Marina continued their conversation in his apartment, completely unaware they were being monitored, Marshall began the final preparations for Phase 2 of his operation. By tomorrow evening, both of them would understand that their carefully constructed plans were built on a foundation that was about to collapse entirely. And Marshall Ashley would finally begin collecting the debt that Preston Quinn had created when he decided to put his hands on a 16-year-old boy who couldn't fight back. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Preston Quinn's Wednesday morning routine was disrupted before he even reached his office. His BMW's tires had been slashed overnight, not random vandalism, but precise cuts that ensured the car was undrivable but not obviously sabotaged. To casual observers, it looked like wear and tear on expensive tires, but Preston knew better. Someone was escalating. The taxi ride to Pinnacle Communications gave him time to think, but every conclusion led back to the same terrifying possibility. Marshall Ashley knew everything and was conducting a systematic psychological campaign designed to break him down before moving to direct confrontation. Mr. Quinn. His secretary looked up nervously as he entered the office. There's been a problem with your computer. IT says there was some kind of security breach overnight. Preston's blood pressure spiked. What kind of breach? They're not sure yet. All your files are intact, but someone accessed your email account from an external IP address. They want to interview you about potential security vulnerabilities. Preston nodded grimly, understanding that his private communications with Marina were now likely in enemy hands. Whoever was targeting him had escalated from surveillance to active cyber warfare. Sir, his secretary continued, clearly uncomfortable. There's also a gentleman here to see you. He says it's about a security consultation for your building's management company. Preston's instincts screamed danger, But turning away a legitimate business visitor would raise more questions than accepting the meeting. Send him in. The man who entered Preston's office was unremarkable in every way. Medium height, average build, conservatively dressed in a gray suit that could have come from any department store. His face was completely forgettable, the kind of appearance that specialized intelligence operatives cultivated to blend into any environment. Mr. Quinn? I'm Cameron Silva from Titan Security Solutions. The man's handshake was firm but not aggressive, his smile professional but not warm. I understand you live in the Meridian building downtown. That's correct. Preston remained standing, every instinct telling him this was no ordinary sales call. We've been contracted by your building's management company to assess security vulnerabilities for high-profile residents. Recent incidents in similar buildings have raised concerns about personal safety and privacy protection. What kind of incidents? Cameron's expression grew serious. Break-ins, stalking, sophisticated surveillance operations targeting successful professionals. People in your position, advertising executives, financial consultants, anyone with access to valuable information or high-profile clients, have become attractive targets for various criminal enterprises. Preston felt his paranoia crystallize into certainty. This wasn't a coincidence. The timing was too perfect, the phrasing too pointed. Someone was sending him a message through this supposed security consultant. What would you recommend? Preston asked, testing his theory. Complete security assessment of your residence, including electronic counter-surveillance measures, enhanced access controls, and personal protection protocols. Cameron handed him a business card that looked completely legitimate. We specialize in protecting clients who may not realize they're being targeted until the situation becomes acute. The word acute hung in the air like a threat. Preston studied the business card, noting that Titan Security Solutions had the same area code as Ashley Security Solutions. How soon could you begin this assessment? We could start immediately. In fact, given the sophistication of some recent operations we've detected, I'd recommend beginning tonight. Surveillance teams often escalate their activities after business hours when they assume their targets are more vulnerable. Preston's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he processed the implications. If this man was connected to Marshall Ashley, and Preston was now certain he was, then his apartment was already compromised. His phone, his computer, his most private conversations with Marina were all likely being monitored by people who knew exactly how to leverage that information. I'll need to check with my building's management company, Preston said, trying to buy time to think. Of course. Cameron's smile never wavered. Though you might want to hurry. Our intelligence suggests that whoever's been watching you is planning to escalate their operations very soon. Possibly as early as this weekend. This weekend, when Preston and Marina were planning to tell Marshall about their relationship and their move to Portland. The timing couldn't be coincidental. I appreciate the information, Preston said carefully. I'll be in touch. Excellent. Oh, and Mr. Quinn. Cameron paused at the office door. You might want to reconsider any travel plans you have for the immediate future. People who feel cornered sometimes make desperate decisions that put innocent bystanders at risk. After Cameron left, Preston sat heavily in his executive chair, trying to process the full scope of what was happening. Marshall Ashley knew everything. He was conducting a sophisticated psychological warfare campaign designed to destabilize Preston's confidence and disrupt his plans. And he had the resources and expertise to make good on any threats he might choose to make. Preston's phone buzzed with a text from Marina. Emergency meeting with Morrison client. Won't be able to meet for lunch. Sorry, but Preston knew Marina well enough to detect the subtle changes in her texting style. The message felt different, more formal, less intimate. Either she was genuinely overwhelmed with work, or she was beginning to sense that their relationship had attracted unwanted attention. At 2:30 p.m., Preston's worst fears were confirmed when his ex-wife called from Michigan. Preston, this is awkward, but I need to ask you something. Has anyone been asking questions about our marriage? About the divorce? Preston's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? A private investigator contacted me yesterday. Said he was conducting a background check for a potential employer of yours. Asked about our relationship, the reasons for our divorce, whether there were any incidents of violence. What did you tell him? The truth. That you never physically hurt me, but that you were controlling and manipulative. that you had anger management problems and a tendency to intimidate people who couldn't fight back. Her voice carried old pain mixed with new concern. Preston, what kind of job requires that level of background investigation? It's probably nothing, Preston lied. Just standard corporate due diligence for a promotion. Be careful, his ex-wife said quietly. The investigator seemed very thorough, very professional. Whatever company hired him has serious resources. After ending the call, Preston stared out his office window at the downtown skyline, understanding that his carefully constructed professional persona was being systematically dismantled. Marshall Ashley wasn't just targeting his relationship with Marina. He was attacking Preston's entire life, his career, his reputation, his future. And Preston had no idea how to fight back against an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. At 4:15 p.m., his secretary knocked on his door again. Mr. Quinn, there's a problem with your credit cards. The bank called. They flagged several suspicious transactions and frozen your accounts pending investigation. Preston's hands shook as he called his bank's fraud department. The customer service representative was apologetic but firm. Multiple transactions had been flagged as potentially fraudulent, including several large cash advances and wire transfers that Preston didn't remember making. We'll need you to come in person to verify your identity and review all recent account activity, the representative explained. This could take several days to resolve. Preston hung up, understanding that Marshall had just cut off his access to financial resources. Without credit cards or bank access, he couldn't pay for hotels, flights, or any of the expenses required for a quick escape to Portland. He was being systematically trapped. At 6 p.m., as Preston was preparing to leave the office, Marina called instead of texting. Preston, I need to cancel tonight. Marshall suggested we have a family dinner since Nate's feeling better, and I can't think of a good excuse to decline. Marina, we need to talk. There have been some developments. What kind of developments? Preston looked around his office, suddenly paranoid that every conversation was being monitored. Not over the phone. Tomorrow morning, first thing. Preston, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Just be careful. Don't do anything unusual. Don't change your normal routines. And Marina? When you're with Marshall tonight, watch his behavior carefully. See if he seems different in any way. Different how? Just watch him. And we'll talk tomorrow. Preston ended the call and sat alone in his office as the sun set over the city. For 8 months, he'd been the one with power in his relationship with Marina, the sophisticated mentor guiding a naive suburban wife toward a more fulfilling life. He'd been the one with plans and resources and connections. Now he was trapped in his own office, afraid to go home, cut off from his finances, and facing an enemy who seemed to anticipate his every move. For the first time since childhood, Preston Quinn felt completely powerless. And somewhere across the city, Marshall Ashley was sitting in his home office, monitoring Preston's every move and preparing for the final phase of an operation that would leave both Preston and Marina with nowhere to run and no choice but to face the consequences of their betrayal. The hunter had become the hunted, and Marshall Ashley had always been very, very good at hunting. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Marina Ashley arrived home at 6:47 p.m. to find Marshall in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be an elaborate family dinner. The dining room table was set with their good china, something they usually reserved for holidays and special occasions. Candles flickered in the center of the table, and the aroma of her favorite meal filled the house. What's all this? Marina asked, though something in Marshall's demeanor made her feel uneasy despite the romantic gesture. I thought we should have a proper family dinner, Marshall said, not looking up from the stove. It's been too long since the three of us sat down together without distractions. Nate appeared from the living room, his jaw still wired but his spirits visibly improved. Dad made that chicken thing you like, Mom. The one with the herbs. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Marina kissed the top of Nate's head, noting how Marshall watched the interaction with unusual intensity. How are you feeling? Better. Dr. Chen says I might be able to eat solid food next week. They settled around the dining room table, and for a moment, Marina could almost pretend they were still the happy family they'd once been. Marshall served dinner with the same careful attention he brought to everything else, ensuring Nate's portion was properly liquefied and checking that Marina had everything she needed. So, Marshall said as they began eating, I've been thinking about our vacation plans for this summer. Marina's fork paused halfway to her mouth. They hadn't discussed summer vacation plans, and the topic felt loaded given her secret plans to be living in Portland by then. I know we usually go to the beach house, Marshall continued, but I thought maybe this year we could try something different. Europe, maybe. I've always wanted to show you and Nate where I was stationed in Germany. That sounds expensive, Marina said carefully. I've been putting money aside for a while now. Thought it might be nice to take a real family trip before Nate heads off to college. Marshall's gray eyes met hers across the table. Unless you have other plans? The question felt like a trap, though Marina couldn't understand why. Marshall's behavior was perfectly normal, attentive, loving, focused on their family. But something underneath his words suggested deeper currents she couldn't read. No other plans, she said, the lie coming easily despite her growing discomfort. Good. I already started looking at flights. Thought we might spend 2 weeks touring Germany and France. Visit some castles, see some art museums. Very romantic and educational. Marina nodded, though the idea of spending 2 weeks in close quarters with Marshall felt suffocating after 8 months of freedom with Preston. That sounds lovely. Dad, Nate interjected. Can we visit those places you showed me in your photo albums? From when you were in the army. Of course, son. I'd love to show you where your old man learned to be a soldier. Marshall smiled at his son with genuine warmth, then turned back to Marina. It'll be just like old times. The three of us, exploring the world together. Marina felt increasingly trapped by the conversation. Every reference to future plans together felt like chains being wrapped around her, binding her to a life she'd already decided to leave. Speaking of old times, Marshall continued, I ran into Jim Morrison downtown today. You remember Jim, from the base in Germany? Marina nodded, though she had no memory of anyone named Jim Morrison. He mentioned something interesting. Said he'd heard through the grapevine that someone was asking questions about my military service. Background checks, reference calls, that sort of thing. Marshall's tone remained conversational, but his eyes never left Marina's face. Any idea why someone might be investigating me? No, Marina said quickly, though her heart rate spiked. Why would anyone investigate you? That's what I wondered. Jim thought it might be related to a potential government contract. You know how thorough their security clearances can be. But it got me thinking about other possibilities. Marshall paused to take a sip of wine, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Like what? Marina asked, despite herself. Well, divorce attorneys sometimes hire private investigators to dig up information on spouses, especially when there might be custody issues or significant assets at stake. Marshall's voice remained perfectly calm. Of course, that would only happen if someone was planning to file for divorce without telling their partner. Marina's blood turned to ice. The conversation had shifted from family vacation plans to divorce attorneys with a subtlety that left her reeling. Did Marshall know about her consultation with the Portland lawyer? Was he testing her, or was this genuine coincidence? That seems paranoid, she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. Maybe, but 12 years in special forces taught me to pay attention to patterns. Like how you've been working late every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 months. Or how your mileage doesn't match your claimed destinations. Or how your phone shows text messages to numbers you've never mentioned. The casual revelation that Marshall had been monitoring her activities hit Marina like a physical blow. Her husband, quiet, steady, trusting Marshall, had been conducting surveillance on her for months. Marshall, I'm not accusing you of anything, he said gently, reaching across the table to pat her hand. I'm just explaining why someone might hire investigators to look into my background. People planning major life changes often want to know exactly what they're up against. Nate looked between his parents with growing confusion, sensing undercurrents he couldn't understand. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, son, Marshall said, his voice warm and reassuring. Your mother and I were just discussing some complicated adult topics. Nothing for you to worry about. But Marina could see the lie in Marshall's eyes. Everything was not fine. Her husband knew about her affair, knew about her plans, and was conducting some kind of psychological chess game she didn't understand. I should call work, Marina said, standing abruptly. Make sure the Morrison presentation is ready for tomorrow. Of course, don't let me keep you from your important work. Marshall's smile was perfectly pleasant and absolutely terrifying. Marina retreated to her home office, her hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. Marshall knew. He'd known for who knew how long. And instead of confronting her directly, he'd been watching, waiting, planning. She called Preston's personal line, but it went straight to voicemail. His office line rang busy. Even his text messages weren't going through. For the first time since their affair began, Marina felt completely isolated from the man she'd planned to build a new life with. Preston had warned her that something was wrong, but she dismissed his paranoia as professional stress. Now she understood that Preston's fears were entirely justified. Marina returned to the dining room to find Marshall helping Nate with his evening medications, the picture of a devoted father caring for his injured son. "Everything okay at work?" Marshall asked without looking up. "Fine. Just some last-minute details." "Good. Preston Quinn seems like a demanding boss. I imagine he expects a lot from his employees." The casual mention of Preston's name made Marina's stomach drop. Marshall knew. He knew everything. "He's thorough," Marina said carefully. "I'm sure he is. Successful people usually are." Marshall finished organizing Nate's pills and turned to face his wife. "Though sometimes thorough people make the mistake of thinking they're smarter than everyone else. That they can manipulate situations without consequences." "What do you mean?" Marshall's smile was colder than she'd ever seen it. "Just a general observation about human nature. People who think they're playing chess sometimes discover they're actually playing against a grandmaster." The threat was clear despite being wrapped in pleasant conversation. Marshall wasn't just aware of her betrayal. He was several moves ahead of whatever game she and Preston thought they were playing. "I'm tired," Marina said, desperately needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of false domesticity. "Of course. It's been a long day for everyone." Marshall stood and began clearing the dinner dishes. "Sweet dreams, honey. Tomorrow's going to be a very interesting day." As Marina lay in bed that night, listening to Marshall's steady breathing beside her, she understood that her carefully planned escape to Portland had become something much more dangerous. She was trapped in her own home, cut off from Preston, and married to a man who'd spent 12 years learning how to dismantle enemies who thought they were smarter than him. And tomorrow, Marina Ashley was going to learn exactly what it cost to betray someone who'd never forgotten how to wage war. Chapter 9. Debts Collected in Full. The final act began at 7:43 a.m. when Preston Quinn arrived at Pinnacle Communications to find two FBI agents waiting in the lobby with his supervisor, Director of Human Resources Sandra Chun, and the company's legal counsel. "Mr. Quinn," said Agent Rebecca Torres, showing her badge. "We need to speak with you about some serious allegations regarding corporate espionage and interstate wire fraud." Preston's legs nearly gave out. "I don't understand. Yesterday evening, we received a comprehensive dossier documenting your systematic theft of proprietary client information, your manipulation of company financial systems, and your coordination with outside parties to sell confidential advertising strategies to competing firms. The accusations were completely fabricated, but the evidence looked devastatingly real. Bank records showing payments from competitor agencies, email correspondence outlining information exchanges, even audio recordings of conversations that had been expertly edited to sound incriminating. "This is impossible," Preston stammered. "I've never—" "Mr. Quinn," interrupted his supervisor, "we're terminating your employment immediately. Security will escort you from the building while the FBI completes their investigation." Marina Ashley watched from her office window as Preston was led out of the building in handcuffs, his reputation destroyed, his career finished, his future in ruins. The man who'd promised her sophistication and passion was now facing federal charges for crimes he'd never committed but couldn't prove he hadn't done. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marshall. "Come home. Now. We need to talk." Marina drove through the city in a daze, understanding that Preston's arrest was just the opening move in whatever Marshall had planned. By the time she reached their suburban home, she'd accepted that her husband had orchestrated the complete destruction of the man who'd broken their son's jaw. Marshall was waiting in the living room, no longer bothering to maintain the pretense of the loving husband. Brett Wise sat beside him, surrounded by surveillance equipment, legal documents, and photographs that chronicled 8 months of betrayal in excruciating detail. "Sit down, Marina," Marshall said quietly. She remained standing, clinging to whatever dignity she had left. "I suppose you know everything. I know that you've been having an affair with Preston Quinn for 8 months. I know you've stolen $47,000 from our joint accounts to fund your relationship. I know you consulted a divorce attorney in Portland about minimizing my parental rights and maximizing your asset recovery. Marshall's voice remained perfectly calm as he outlined the scope of her betrayal, each revelation hitting like a physical blow. I know that Preston Quinn violently assaulted our 16-year-old son to cover up your affair. I know you stood there and watched it happen. And I know you were planning to take Nate away from me and disappear to the other side of the country with a man who specializes in manipulating and abandoning women. Marshall, I can explain. No explanation necessary. Marshall stood, his gray eyes reflecting the kind of cold determination Marina had never seen before. You made your choices. You chose betrayal over loyalty. You chose a stranger over your family. You chose your own desires over your son's welfare. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Brett Wise spoke for the first time, his boyish features hardened with disgust. We have recordings of you prioritizing your relationship with Preston over Nate's recovery. We have documentation of you stealing money from your family to pay for romantic getaways. We have evidence of you planning to take a 16-year-old boy away from his father to live with a man who'd already shown he was willing to violence hurt children. Marina felt the walls closing in around her. What do you want? What I want, Marshall said, is for you to understand that actions have consequences, that betraying someone's trust carries a price, and that some debts must be paid in full. He handed her a manila folder. Divorce papers. Filed this morning. You'll find the terms very straightforward. Marina opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the legal documents that would dissolve 15 years of marriage. The settlement was devastating but legal. Marshall would retain the house, primary custody of Nate, and most of their joint assets. Marina would receive enough money to start over, but nowhere near enough to maintain her current lifestyle. You can't do this, she whispered. It's already done. The court has reviewed evidence of your adultery, your financial impropriety, and your plan to relocate our son without proper legal procedures. They've ruled in my favor on all major points. I'll fight this. I'll hire the best lawyer. With what money? Brett asked coldly. Your personal accounts have been frozen pending investigation of the stolen funds. Your employment at Pinnacle Communications has been terminated due to your association with Preston Quinn's criminal activities. And every reputable divorce attorney in the state has already been retained by Marshall's legal team, creating conflicts of interest that prevent them from representing you. Marina stared at the two men who'd systematically destroyed her life in less than 24 hours. You planned all of this. We responded to your choices, Marshall corrected. You chose to betray your family. We simply ensured that the consequences matched the scope of your betrayal. What about Nate? He's my son too. Nate will decide for himself whether he wants a relationship with the mother who watched a stranger break his jaw and said nothing. Marshall's voice carried no emotion whatsoever. But he'll make that decision from the safety of his father's house, with people who actually put his welfare ahead of their own desires. Marina felt the last of her fight drain away. Preston was facing federal charges that would destroy his life even if he was eventually acquitted. Her career was finished, her reputation ruined, her finances depleted. She had no allies, no resources, and no reasonable hope of changing the outcome Marshall had crafted. How long have you known? She asked quietly. I suspected for months. I knew for certain the day Preston put his hands on my son. Marshall's gray eyes never wavered. That's when this stopped being about a failing marriage and started being about protecting my family from people who'd proven they were willing to hurt children. I never wanted Nate to get hurt. But you didn't protect him when he did get hurt. You stood there and watched, more concerned about covering up your affair than defending your son. That's when you stopped being Nate's mother and became just another threat to his welfare. The finality in Marshall's voice made clear that no amount of pleading or explanation would change his mind. He'd made his decision based on her actions, not her words. You have 72 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate this house, Marshall continued. Brett will supervise to ensure nothing inappropriate is removed. After that, all communication between us will go through attorneys. Marshall, please. Mrs. Ashley. Marshall's voice turned formal, indicating that the conversation was over. You chose to betray the trust of a man who'd spent 12 years learning how to destroy enemies more dangerous than you could imagine. You chose to threaten the welfare of his only child. And you chose to align yourself with a man who thought he could intimidate a 16-year-old boy without consequences. Marshall stood, towering over his soon-to-be ex-wife with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Those choices have been very expensive for you. They've cost you your marriage, your family, your career, and your future. Preston Quinn's choices have cost him even more: his freedom, his reputation, and his understanding of what happens when cowards pick fights with people who actually know how to fight back. You've destroyed both our lives. No, Marshall said quietly. You destroyed your own lives the moment you decided that betraying my trust and hurting my son were acceptable prices to pay for your happiness. I simply ensured that the bill came due in full. Marina Ashley walked out of her home for the last time 3 days later, carrying 2 suitcases and enough money to start over somewhere far away. Preston Quinn was facing federal charges that would likely result in years in prison. His sophisticated lifestyle revealed as a house of cards built on other people's money and trust. Nate Ashley recovered from his broken jaw and decided he wanted no contact with the mother who'd chosen her lover over her son's safety. He focused on his studies, his basketball, and rebuilding his relationship with the father who'd proven that family loyalty was worth fighting for. And Marshall Ashley returned to his security consulting business, his reputation for getting results now enhanced by word-of-mouth stories about what happened to people who threatened his family. His former commanding officers would have recognized the outcome. Marshall Ashley had once again collected a debt in full, with interest, and left his enemies with a clear understanding of why some battles should never be started. The suburban house was quiet now, but it was an honest quiet. No more lies, no more deception, no more people who thought they could betray trust without consequences. Just a father and son, rebuilding their lives on a foundation strong enough to withstand any future storms. And Marshall Ashley slept peacefully, knowing that anyone who might threaten his family in the future would hear the story of what happened to the last people who'd made that mistake. Some debts, after all, were paid in full, and some lessons were taught so thoroughly that they never needed to be repeated. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.